I think it's quite clear that mobile is not the future, but mobile is now. And these guys are helping to reinvent what's possible on the ground in education. And as one of the verticals for today, we thought it would be a great idea to give you a sense of what's going on the ground. So we talked a little bit beforehand, and I think it would be great if each of these guys could give you sort of one example of the here and now that excites them about the potential of mobile to transform education. Then we'll dive in a little bit deeper.
Awesome. Sure. So, wow, that's loud. All right. The biggest thing that we see happening is experimentation happening across K-20, not just the universities, but also in classes everywhere. And the willingness to actually try things out, that's incredible. You know, I think 2 years ago, if we had to go talk to a school about going digital, it was a question of if and, you know, what's going on, what this is about. Now it's really moved to how, and how do we get there? Experimentation happening in, you know, in schools at all grades, in colleges. That's the most exciting thing. People are really trying to see is first of all, how do I get my content to be digital? How can I use it across the board? And that is the first step towards taking students into this new mobile world.
That's great. Sam?
Yeah, for us, so Class Dojo is in K-12, and historically one of the problems in K-12 has been distribution. How do you go beyond individual schools and districts and get to ubiquity across the country? And for us, like in our first year, we've seen the power of mobile to get us there, and you know, almost purely through teacher word of mouth and teachers sharing, you know, a few mechanisms through mobile, hooking into address books and things. We've seen teachers do a tremendous job of spreading the word about tools and services they like, and I think that's different this time.
Dennis?
So we work directly with consumers and students, and we teach them directly on our platform through our 7,000 courses. And I'll actually just share one of our student stories. So we had a Starbucks barista out in the Midwest, and she took a series of courses to become a web developer, and she actually ended up enrolling in all of these courses and ended up getting actually a job out in San Francisco and moving out to the Bay Area. So it's always encouraging to actually see that you can go on your own and actually learn online and really provide that value to these students and change their lives.
I want to flip it slightly. We're all here because we see the potential of mobile. We're involved in the industry in one way, shape, or form. Walking around at breakfast, I think that we are all fully mobile and fully connected. So there's kind of a falling off the log presumption about this, that this is going to happen, it's going to work, it's going to transform these basic industries. I'm going to flip the question for our panelists this morning and ask, if mobile doesn't transform education, what will have been the roots of that failure? So if mobile fails, if 10 years from now we're looking at schools and parent interaction with teachers and students that looks fundamentally the way it is, what did we do wrong, or what was wrong with the system? Sam, you want to start? Just as you go for the water bottle?
I'll just go the easy questions first. Yeah, so for me, I think there's a couple of things. I'll say one, and then maybe we can just go around a few times. For me, I think like the great danger is that we forget about who our users are. And you know, for Class Dojo, it's teachers and students and parents. And in that kind of triangle, teachers are the decision makers at the moment for what technology gets used in classrooms and how it gets used. And I think like mobile on its own, like technology on its own won't change things. Just throwing more tech into schools, it's been done before in various iterations, whether it was whiteboards, whether it was digital projectors, etc. It won't do anything on its own. I think like a really, really deep understanding of users, their pain points, and how they can successfully use technology in their own context is going to be really important, and more so in education than anywhere else, because you have this responsibility. Like you're trying to empower teachers to do great stuff for students and for parents. So there's this great multiplier for stuff you do well and a great multiplier for stuff you do badly. So it's pretty high stakes, and I think like it would be arrogant for us to say, well, it's just mobile, just technology that's going to change this. It's empowering teachers and empowering people who are in the system.
So engineering-driven change is not going to
not on its own, I think.
Dennis?
Yeah, so I think ultimately it boils down to retention and engagement as it relates to online learning specifically. So it's great that we're providing all these tools and these platforms and this content online for people to learn on their own, but the reality of it is it's actually pretty difficult and lonely if you're not a pretty self-motivated student to actually learn online. And frankly, that's what a physical environment where you have that interactivity and those discussions, I think that really helps students stay motivated and engaged. So when you think about online education and online learning specifically, if you really try to go out and craft a new ritual for a student, for them to learn and sort of break apart, create a new time, if you will, in the day for them to do this new activity, that's going to be really difficult. So what we try to do is we try to create our user experience in such a way that it is already incorporated into their daily ritual. So if it's learning on mobile via our iPhone application as an example, that we see that typically happens during the commutes, or the commute times, or during the evenings where they're already doing something else, they're already engaged in a different activity, so it participates in an existing ritual, so to speak. So at the end of the day, though, if this doesn't work, so to speak, we think we really haven't delivered on the promise of actually getting the bulk of the students who are not super self-motivated to be able to stay engaged in these learning environments.
So that's really transforming by creating a whole different system, if you will, that fits into the lives of people for whom the current system doesn't work. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the good news is the genie is out of the bottle. So there is going to be some sort of change. I mean, there's no going back on it. Digital is absolutely here to stay. So for me, failure would be the scale at which you can take this. And I think one of the key things we'll have to really look at is the learning experience. Thinking about the user is extremely important, but also is the content that you need to use. On a phone, you cannot squeeze a big piece of content in the same fashion, and you have to do something with it. So it's how you think of, say, a digital textbook is a big piece of content, how it's going to go to micro content. How are you going to really consume it? I mean, if you close your eyes, can you see a kid in Africa on a $30 Android phone 2 years from now getting a great education just by using their phone, right? I mean, that's the vision where at least we think how education needs to go. And so it's going to take a great user experience. It's going to take mobile technologies, tablets and smartphones for sure. And then on top of it, it needs a great learning experience that the student can simply go through. Technology needs to disappear when you don't need it. It's just, when I say technology, meaning all the little features and things like that, they need to disappear. And so thinking of micro content and how you consume it on smaller screens is, I think, the difference between scaling like this or scaling like this.
So I'm hearing all three of you say that this is about focusing on a new sets of demand contours. Whether it's the demand contour of the user, the triangle of the user that Sam was describing, the users outside the current system, or the users who, with a mobile device, actually need the material and the educational experience transformed, which is very different than a supply-driven approach, or even suggesting that some of the existing platforms can the existing learning platforms can be migrated across. I think Sal will talk more about that. But we've got a few minutes for some questions from members of the audience, and I wanted to open it up and see if you wanted to pepper the team with some questions of your own. So the question for those of you in the corners who might not have heard is that when you think about digital learning, you often think about one student, one device. What about the important social aspect of learning, whether it's mediated by technology or just classroom play?
So from the way I see it, it's extremely important. And actually, even if you take a look at COPA, which is a regulation that we as entrepreneurs have to live by, especially on under 13, that's very strict on what you can or cannot do. The way we would think of approaching it is in a classroom, in the K-12, a classroom environment. Because having kids in the same group who's under the same teacher is a much better way to communicate than randomly across people across the world. So as a starting point. But I think the US government needs to update COPA to say, okay, how does this now apply in a digital world? For example, COPA says you cannot give an email address to someone under 13, but you do need some kind of a unique identifier if a kid highlights in a book and they drop their device in the bathtub, and we now have to back it up and give it back to them. We need an identifier for the kid to give them back the highlights. Otherwise, it's going to start from scratch. So I think there are multiple ways this thing will come in, but to answer your question, it has to start from the classroom level and then slowly grows from there. Because there's a lot of rules and regulations, you have to be very careful. I mean, I know of a startup which was about to be bought by Yahoo, and they were making games for kids. And the transaction fell apart at the last minute because a lawyer said, well, according to COPA rules, you didn't save this data like this. So if we acquire you, we're going to get all these liabilities for the entire company. So this is how, in under 13, how key something like this is.
So Sam, go ahead.
I was just going to say this could be a shameless plug for Class Dojo, because our company isn't actually focused on like the content portion. It's much more focused on actually behavioral and character development. So all the non-cognitive stuff, things like creativity or curiosity. So we're actually thinking very deeply about those things. I won't go into it now, but the way that we approach it is that great teachers know that they need to build a whole person and not just deliver content. So we help them do that in the classroom at the moment, and we think there's a big role for that with parents and groups of students outside of the classroom. And there's already good offline parallels for it, right? There's already like group activities, there's already things that you do with your friends after school, and we're kind of facilitating those and encouraging those and putting some data behind that and helping parents have more of an insight into that. So,
Thanks.
Yeah, I'd just add to that and say I'm personally a big believer in a flipped classroom or a blended environment where you can do a lot of the instruction and content consumption on your own, but actually go into a physical environment where teachers are engaged in facilitating that narrative and that learning and discussion, if you will. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and stepping out of the moderator seat, I think that's right, is that the technology is really enabling humans to do what humans do best, which is to nurture and foster that kind of engagement and interaction. And if we can get the law right, mobile provides a real opportunity for collaborative projects that span the globe. I mean, think about what we learned through Fold It, and the ability of massive collaboration across the globe, and kids are eager for that kind of work. Another question, please. Great, important question. Does all of this enthusiasm challenge us around the digital divide, and is there a potential that all of this enthusiasm will simply create a different category of haves and have-nots?
So from what we see in the market, I think it's not, and I'll give you an example. So LA Unified, the second largest school district in the US, has a $400 million project to move all of LA kids to digital over the next 3 years. The pilot alone is for huge amounts of money. So the second largest school district, which has all kinds of students in it on all backgrounds, is taking care of going digital for everyone. The US government is also, there's a program called E-Rate, which takes money from the telcos and makes it available for kids, for schools to use for internet access. Is they have now a paper out which says, can you give the same money to give poor kids access to the school and pay for the internet access? So we are seeing the right kinds of signs happening, at least at the public level. But private schools definitely are moving much faster than public schools. But they're already private schools. There's already a divide. I think, I'm very optimistic that this globally will decrease the divide because mobile technology is getting so much cheaper, and you can get access to so much stuff so much more faster. So I'm very hopeful for it.
Sam?
I just kind of echo some of that. Like, I think it's just riding an adoption curve. It'll be slower in some schools than others, but it's going to happen. So it needs to happen.
Yeah, so we've had students from over 200 countries use our courses on our platform, and about 50% of our traffic is actually overseas, and we continue to see that grow. So, so long as we're continuing to enable everybody around the world to be able to access our content, I wouldn't be surprised to see the overseas traffic continue to grow, outpace what we see in the U.S.
And I think that there is some leapfrogging going on in that regard, as we've seen in other applications of mobile technology. And I think that the economics of the machinery themselves are now putting the cost equation for the school-based stuff in favor of adopting a loaded tablet over the 5 stacked published textbooks. That the dollars are pretty darn close at this point. I think we have time for maybe 2 more questions.
Look, so the way we see it, there's a transition. It's not certainly going to go digital, and you're not going to need pencil and paper, right? So it's a transition. If we look at many of the projects that are happening in the US that we're involved in and we're seeing everywhere, the first question they have is, all right, this content that we have today, can we make it slightly smaller, more interactive, you can personalize? But no one is saying that pen is going away. Now, Samsung, for example, on their tablet is doing a brilliant job of how you can use pen. And for education, pen is going to be key. And yes, pen on a smartphone is going to be a challenge. But then there's nothing to say that you can't use your content coming in, but you still can write on a piece of paper. Now, how do you submit a homework if you're doing it by hand? You could take a picture of it. There's so many things to do, but it's going to be a mix. I don't think anytime soon it's certainly going to be all digital, right? And you don't use anything physical.
So I'm sure Sal will talk about this, but like if you think about like the way that many of us learn programming, or the way the world is going, really, right? Like the kind of jobs that all of hopefully our kids will do, like they don't exist yet, and the content for those jobs probably doesn't exist yet either, right? So like really, those kids are going to have to learn through their whole lifetimes and have the skills and the abilities to be able to learn through the whole lifetime. So the model, I think, like of mugging up a certain amount of content. Or a certain amount of skills which aren't the most relevant in a fixed period of time, and then being expected to deploy them after like passing an exam, it just doesn't seem to be the right model. Or maybe it's not the right model anymore, And Kevin alluded to that earlier. So for us, like Class Dojo, we're completely the opposite side. So we believe there's this whole other half of education that's almost completely unaddressed at the moment, and it's the half that goes beyond just delivering content towards actually developing who you are as a person. And these kind of softer skills like curiosity or persistence or resilience or creativity, those are the things that we all hire for, the things that you'll go through many selection decisions for. And I feel the content portion, like guys like Udemy, we're going to learn through our whole lifetime, so it doesn't make sense to constrain it.
I just reiterate what these guys said.
Perfect. I think, we'll make way for Sal in just a second, but I think that this whole idea of mobile and digital in general providing content and challenges to students at the right time in the right place is really what this is about. And if it's not cursive in 3rd grade, maybe like me, cursive was a challenge until sophomore year in college. So I think that really is one of the capacities that we're going to talk about. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panel. I think it's been a great start to the education strand of today, and look forward to following up with all of you as the day goes on. Thanks, guys.